Here we go. There we go. Yes. So as Matt said, I have to be very brief. That's fine. I'm going to do my best. But I have loved Fulton Sheen for longer than I can remember. Unfortunately, I was not around when he was in this world, but through prayer, I believe we are really good friends. That's the vibe I get, anyway. Just real briefly, some things about him that I think you all might really take and just kind of grab onto like I did. One, he is brilliant. Like, he taught at Catholic University for over 25 years, and he loved teaching. Like, was constantly teaching. Said you can't just be a teacher and to teach things. You have to learn what you're teaching before you teach them. And he firmly believed that, and it's really evident in all of the. If you YouTube him, you can hear him, and he gets really loud. Especially, like, he's not afraid if things come up about the truth. Like, he's not afraid to just say it. Like, he doesn't ever shy away. And I think sometimes we get a little nervous about, like, this is what I believe, but he never did that. And I gained so much inspiration from him. Just some quick little like fun things about him. Once, after one of his open heart surgeries, he was in the ICU, and the gentleman next to him was dying. And at this point, Fulton Sheen really didn't have like a lot of strength left. Like, he was still recovering. But the lady that was in the hospital room said she saw his hand go up, and he just like blessed him like as best as he could while he's in recovery, and blessed this man before he died. So that was one thing. They said whoever he talked to, he just wanted to bring Christ to that person. Another story about him was when he was first ordained a priest, he was sent back to St. Patrick's in Peoria, Illinois, which was at the time just like a remote, kind of a small Hispanic community, but not very many people. And so the Archbishop just sent him there, said, go, do your thing. So he gets down there, and instead of kind of like, what do I do? He went door to door to every resident in town and asked them and invited them personally to come in to Mass. And one door that he got to, a guy chucked like a wrench at his head. And after 25 minutes of Fulton Sheen talking to him, he brought his entire family to Mass next Sunday. So he's just like, he's absolutely phenomenal. I really do encourage you. Like I said, just on YouTube, you can type in Fulton Sheen, and you can see all of his old shows, and they're totally worth it. He's really identifiable. Like Anna mentioned, we even have free Fulton Sheen books in the back. They're limited, but definitely grab one. With all that being said, I really cannot contain the excitement or put into words how honored we are to have Bonnie here with us tonight, because she'll go into more detail about that. But I know she's a big Archbishop Fulton Sheen fan. And it's a blessing, and it's an honor to have her here. So we're thankful she made the trip, and we can't wait to hear. Without further ado, Bonnie Engstrom.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, good. So, like Matt said, I am a blogger, so I'm going to take a picture for my blog. So look pretty. Yay. Okay. Oh, no, you're going to make it. There we go. Okay, thank you. So I want to give you guys a warning. Yesterday I came down with a really bad head cold, so my brain is kind of foggy. I'm on a lot of drugs right now, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. So I like to begin my talk at the very beginning. Babe, can you go to the next slide? All right. Anytime now. There we go. Okay. So that's the very beginning of my story. When Travis and I were thinner and better rested. And when we got married, one of the things that we looked at was the church's teachings on sexuality and marriage, natural family planning, and kids. And even though it was a kind of a hard pill to swallow, we looked at it and we knew that it was true. And so we decided that we were going to practice NFP, because one of the foundational teachings of NFP is that babies are gifts. They are only gifts, and they are always gifts. Which is good, because God really likes giving me the gift of babies. So that ended up well for me, that I had that conviction. Additionally, when my daughter was, I think, 17 months old, and my son was 3 months old. I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and I'm holding my NFP charts, and I'm holding a positive EPT, and I'm saying, I know how this happened, but how did this happen? Surprise, we had a baby. But from that very first moment, I said a prayer, and I said, my husband is a public school teacher, I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I was like, God, I believe you want this baby to exist. I believe this baby is a blessing and a gift, and you need to provide. It wasn't really a request. I was just letting him know. So it was during this time that my pregnancy that I got to know this man, Archbishop Fulton Sheen. In a peripheral sense, I had always known who he was. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, and raised in Peoria, Illinois. And I grew up in a small town kind of in between those two places. And so I knew he was this hometown boy, and that I didn't know what he had done. He had a television show. He was really famous for some reason. Honestly, the first time I saw him on EWTN, I thought he looked like a vampire. But he loves me anyways. So, but it was during this time that I got to know him, during my pregnancy. I started watching YouTube videos of him, and just like Chrissy was saying, he was dynamic. He was passionately in love with Jesus Christ. He was passionately in love with the Catholic Church. And I was really drawn to his charisma, his intelligence, his humor, and just how approachable he was. Now he was... if you could go to the next slide. There's 5 things that, I'm not an expert theologian on Fulton Sheen, but there's 5 things that I have come to find out about him that I really believe are the reasons he should be canonized. The first is, on the day that he was ordained, as he laid prostrate on the floor of the cathedral in Peoria, he made a promise to Christ that he would keep a holy hour every day for the rest of his life. And for over 60 years, every single day, Fulton Sheen kept a holy hour. Now, most American Catholics don't even believe in the true presence of the Eucharist. And to have this kind of an example of a man who would, in the oddest places, he traveled the world, in the oddest places, at 11 p.m. at night, he would find a church so that he could keep this promise to Christ, so he could adore Christ in the Eucharist. I think that's the kind of example we need so that we can rekindle that passion about the Eucharist. The second thing is the Marian consecration. I think a lot of people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, we don't really get the whole Mary thing, which is a shame, because just like Fulton Sheen knew, Mary, all she wants to do is bring us to Jesus. And so getting to know Mary, it's like, if my kids were here, I'd be like, yes, I'm their mom. And this is Bennett, and this is Lydia. And I would be really proud, and I would want you to meet my children. I would want you to engage with my children because I love them so much. And it's not about me, it's about them. They're much cuter. And Mary is the same way about Jesus. And Fulton Sheen got that, and he promoted that, and he encouraged it. That's another example I think that we really need in the world, and especially in the U.S. The third thing is silent suffering. Chrissy also referred to when he had his open heart surgeries. Especially as he aged in life, he had a lot of heart issues, and he also had some personal suffering that he went through. When he was the Bishop of Rochester in New York for a few years, that was a very difficult time for him. He was basically in exile, if you will, and it was really, really difficult. But he never talked about it except to the people who were closest to him. And to this day, if you ask any of those people who are still living, tell me about Fulton Sheen when he was the bishop. What was that like for him? They'll say, well, Bishop Sheen didn't want to talk about it, and I don't want to talk about it either. I want to, guard his privacy. Think about when you get upset and you get on Facebook and you update your status. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe, blah, 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 rant, rant, rant. I mean, it happens all the time. unfollow the people who do that. Because I think we don't know how to suffer silently. We don't know how to use our suffering and offer it up for redemptive suffering. Fulton Sheen knew how to do that, and he knew how to do it in a private way where he made it a gift to Christ. I think that's an example we need. Fourth, he was pro-life. There's a fairly famous prayer that he wrote, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you very much. I don't know, it's the spiritual adoption prayer. Have you guys heard that before? Okay, good. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So you spiritually adopt a baby for 9 months, and you pray for this baby for 9 months to protect it from abortion or whatever. And so he wrote that prayer. He loved children. He loves babies. And, the story I'm going to tell involves my son, who was a newborn baby. But as I have gotten to know more about Fulton Sheen and his cause for canonization, it's been amazing how many of his alleged miracles involve unborn or just born babies. I think he really was pro-life. I think he really had a soft spot for babies and little kids. And Lord knows we need help with the pro-life movement. So, and the last thing is he was a powerful evangelist. Just like Chrissy was saying, he was so approachable. He used every form of media available to tell people the gospel. So before there even was television, he had a radio show. Once television came, he had a TV show. He wrote over 60 books. He had multiple columns in newspapers, pamphlets he produced. He traveled the world speaking about Jesus Christ because what he wanted more than anything, it didn't matter if you were his cabbie or a queen, he wanted to make sure that you were personally in love with Jesus. And I as a blogger, as someone really involved in social media, that means a lot to me. I think that's a really powerful example. So those are my 5 reasons I think he should be a saint. Fulton Sheen died in 1979, and this picture was taken 2 months before he died. At the end of his life, he was not very popular in New York City among some people in power. And so when JP2 came to New York, Archbishop Sheen wasn't even invited to celebrate the Mass. He just sat in the back of the church in the Our Lady Chapel, which was his favorite part. But at the end of the Mass, JP2, who learned English from listening to Fulton Sheen preach, JP2 asked to meet Archbishop Sheen, and he embraced him, and he said, "You have written and spoken well of our Lord Jesus Christ. You are a faithful son of the church." And that was, just if Pope Francis told you that, wouldn't you just, you would feel so good. So, and he felt good enough to go home. But I really think that sums up Fulton Sheen more than anything. He wrote and he spoke well of our Lord Jesus Christ, and he was a faithful son of the church. So that's just a little bit about my man Fulty. Now I'm going to take you on to the story about my baby. So I had 3 home births. This is what a home birth looks like. In part, this is the sanitary picture. But James was my 3rd home birth, and it was a healthy pregnancy. It was a beautiful labor. The whole night just was surrounded in prayer. We had friends and family praying for us, and I had mentioned earlier that we really felt like James, this baby that was a gift, that God had given us this baby for a reason, and Travis and I would even lay in bed at night and we would be like, oh my gosh, God is being so faithful to us. This baby is going to be the Pope. Because we just knew there was a reason for this kid to be alive, there was something really amazing going to happen. So the night, thank you so much. So September 15th, it was a Wednesday night, I went into labor, and my midwife came. Everything was going perfectly. We were monitoring his heart rate. It was strong. It was beautiful. I was feeling great. Really, home birth, there's no drugs, but it felt really, really great. And we just felt like we were on the cusp of something amazing, absolutely amazing. But I call this picture clueless because we didn't have a clue that James had a knot in his umbilical cord. Are any of you guys moms or dads? All right, so like 5 of you. Okay. I'm going to gross you out. As I pushed James for about 20 minutes, and during those 20 minutes, as he was descending the birth canal, that knot in his umbilical cord tightened. And it tightened so tightly that it cut off all of the oxygen supply he was receiving from my body. So when James was born, I scooped him up. The midwife placed him in my arms, and I held him like this, and his arms and his legs just dangled. And, sometimes babies, they just need a moment. They need to be stimulated, like the doctor smacking the baby's butt, So my midwife said, say his name. So I said, James, it's your mama. And he didn't move, and he didn't cry, and he was kind of blue. And at this point, it was early in the morning on Thursday, the 16th of September. And when we saw that he wasn't responding, my midwife took him out of my arms and immediately began CPR. Travis, who, God bless him, he had the wherewithal to grab some water and do an emergency baptism. And I remember watching him do that and think, that's good. Because, as a parent, our number one job is to get our kids to heaven. And so, something amazing was supposed to be happening, and the exact opposite was happening. But I felt like, well, at least he'll go to heaven. At least we've done all the parenting we can do for him. So Travis took a cup of water, and he dipped his fingers and his thumb in it, and he let the water dribble on James's forehead as he made the sign of the cross and said, James Fulton, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Now that was the first time that Fulton Sheen's name was invoked. Travis and I give our kids names not just because we like them, but they also have important meanings. Usually there's a family connection, and there's always some kind of a saint connection. And the reason for that is so, like, when I say, Lydia Ann, get over here right now, then St. Anne and St. Lydia can be in heaven praying that my daughter makes a good decision. So that's why we do that. So there is power in that, right? It's an invocation. We had already put James under Fulton Sheen's patronage while I was pregnant with him. So that was the first time that Fulton Sheen's name was invoked. We had a friend there, Jenny. She was there actually just to take pictures, but she was also trained as a NICU nurse, and she immediately heard Fulton Sheen's name. She's a good Catholic girl. Immediately heard Fulton Sheen's name and had a powerful, profound, prayerful moment with Fulton Sheen. That was the second time that Fulton Sheen was brought into that moment. She then left the room to call 911. As I'm sitting there waiting for the paramedics to come, I had just given birth to a 10-pound baby, naturally, in the middle of the night, and he was dead. So I was shutting down. I was exhausted. I was going into a state of shock. And the only thing that I remember is in my head repeating Fulton Sheen's name. Fulton Sheen, Fulton Sheen, Fulton Sheen. It was the closest I could get to prayer, because I couldn't pray. I couldn't find the words that I needed to say. And so I was calling on this man who was my friend, who I had already been asking for prayers from. And I just called on his name, trusting that the Holy Spirit and Fulton Sheen would take care of it and that they would have the right words to say. So the paramedics came. They also could not find a pulse. They looked all over James's body. There's nothing, no pulse. So they took him in the ambulance to OSF St. Francis Hospital in Peoria. And do you want to go to the next slide? So while he's in the ambulance, a normal heart rate should look like that on the top line. It's what I call the bump, bump, jigga, jigga. So that's what a normal heart rate does. Bump, bump, jigga, jigga, bump, bump, jigga, jigga. The jigga, jigga... Sorry, it always makes me think of Will Smith. But the jigga jigga are electrical impulses. And so they don't really do anything except kickstart the heart so that it can pump. And I studied British literature in college, so that's close enough to being right. So that's what a normal heart rate should look like. James was the bottom. They call that PEA. pulseless electrical activity on the monitor. He just had the jigga-jiggas. Now, legally, you can be declared dead if you are PEA on the monitor. And this is what James looked like on the heart monitor on his way to the hospital. In the ambulance, Travis was riding with the ambulance. I was still at home at the time. But they tried to give James 2 doses of epinephrine to restart his heart. And in emergency situations, they will put it right into the marrow of your shin bones or your knees or something like that. Down there. And so the first time they tried it, it was an unstable line. And the epinephrine leaked out. And it caused his entire right leg, from the tip of his toe all the way up to his right buttock, to have a severe chemical burn. If you look at the medical records, it will say necrosis of the tissue. So it was dead. So the poor kid. I mean, he was already dead, and then we were making it worse. But so he got to the emergency room, and he continued to be PEA on the monitor. They did a couple of sonograms of the heart. And it did nothing. It just sat there. Later, several months after the event, a nurse was talking to me, one of the emergency department nurses, and she said that, he's just this tiny, he was 10 pounds, but still, he was this tiny baby, and you just wanted to pick him up and comfort him, right? But you can't do that because they're trying to save his life. And so she held on to his foot. And she told me, Bonnie, it was so cold. It was like the expression cold and dead. And I hope you're never told that as a parent, because that was really hard, So it was the middle of the night. The neonatologists, they're the specialist doctors who take care of the teeny tiny babies in the NICU. The neonatologist, she was on call and was driving into the hospital at this point. And she was on the phone with some of the nurses in the ER. And she said, okay, well, she got an update. This is what we've been doing. This is how long we've been doing it. And the doctor said, well, try for 5 more minutes and then call it. Now, those 5 more minutes weren't because they thought they could actually do something to save James's life. Those 5 more minutes were so when the doctors walked out of that emergency room into the hall to see my husband, they could say, I'm sorry, Mr. Engstrom, we tried everything we could, but your son is dead. That's what those 5 minutes were for. So they tried for 5 more minutes. James did not respond to any of the medications or anything else they were trying to do. All hands were off to call time of death. And that's when James's heart started to beat. 148 beats per minute, which is a perfectly healthy heart rate for a newborn baby, and it never stopped. So that was awesome. Except that, well, do you want to go to the next slide? So this is what James looked like when he was 4 hours old in the NICU. They took him up to the NICU. He's lying on a blue pad. That's cooling therapy. So if you think of Han Solo when he was frozen in Star Wars, that's basically what they did to my son. They do the cooling therapy to prevent further and ongoing damage to the brain and other organs. And so he was basically unconscious. He had a feeding tube. My goodness. See, it's the head cold. He had a feeding tube, a breathing tube. He had an internal thermometer all shoved down his throat. And you can it's kind of a bad picture, the lighting's off, but you can kind of tell how his right leg is a little more purple. So that was the leg that they actually thought they were going to have to amputate it. And it was just so, as a mom, or really any human being with a heart, you would just want to pick him up and, cuddle him because he's laying there shivering, but we couldn't touch him except for his feet, his hands, and every once in a while we could touch the top of his head, because otherwise we would warm him up and that would be bad. They didn't think James would live. He had been without a pulse for 61 minutes. From the time I gave birth to him to the time that his heart started in the emergency room, it had been an hour and a minute. And really it was probably longer because he was still in the birthing canal when he was delivered a stillborn, so it's probably longer than that he went without a pulse, without any oxygen. So when you go, first of all, no one goes without oxygen for an hour. That just doesn't happen. So what they were expecting was massive organ failure. One by one, every organ in his body was going to shut down, and he was just going to die again. They didn't know if he would live through the night or if he would live through the weekend, but he definitely was not going to live through the week. That was just what everyone in the NICU believed. So because of that, the hospital chaplain offered to confirm our son, James. And, again, I'm still in a state of shock. By this time I had arrived to the NICU, and I remember them saying, we can confirm him. Would you like us to confirm him? And I said, well, what will he do when he's in 8th grade? Duh. On one level, I knew what they were saying was, listen, your son is going to die. We can give him the fullness of the graces. He can be a full member of the Catholic Church. We can give him everything possible, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, so he can die a holy death. I knew that on one level, and on another level, I was just like, well, we're in a hospital, and everything's going to be fine, and someday he'll be in 8th grade, and what are we going to do then? And the answer to that question is he'll go through the class with his peers, but he will not be reconfirmed. Just so you know, if that comes up in Catholic trivia. But we decided to name him, I always wanted to name him Linus. Thank you, it's a good name. It's such a good name. And Travis hates blue blankets, and he said no. That's not true, but he doesn't like the name. So sorry if your name is Linus. But I loved it because, again, with the whole saint thing, I was like, no one names their kid Linus anymore. Pope Linus is up in heaven with nothing to do but pray for our son. We got to use it. So when Monsignor Bliss asked what name do you want to use for confirmation, I was like, Linus! I was in shock, but I still had the wherewithal to say Linus. So he's confirmed Linus. And can you go to the next? This, I think, tells it all. The look on our face. Especially poor Travis. I hate this picture because of how he looks. But we were pretty heartbroken. So, okay, can you go to the next one? So this is James at 1 day old. So James was supposed to die. And instead what he did was he got better. So at 1 day old, the leg that they were supposed to amputate is healed so much that there's healthy tissue everywhere except for those 2 little purple marks. And if you were to see James today, he just has 2 scars, one on the inside of his thigh and one on the outside. Can you go to the next one? Okay, they put a lot of fluid in my son. He was not this big when I gave birth. I think it was like 2 pounds of water weight he gained in like a day. So I have a blog, I have Facebook, all that stuff. And I said to the doctor, we want specific prayers. We have people all over the world who are praying for our son. We have people all over the world who are praying for a miracle through the intercession of Fulton Sheen. I need a specific prayer so that I can go home and ask people to pray, what does James need to do to get better? And she said, well, he needs to pee. And he needs to pee however many fluid ounces it was. I don't remember. So I went home, and on Facebook and my blog, I was like, everyone pray for pee. And people did, and it was awesome. And the next morning, so the reason that he needed to pee is because, if you think about it, your brain is your most important organ, right? And there's a whole hierarchy of organs, and I don't know what they are, but the liver and some of those, they're not as important. And you keep nodding, so I think you know what I'm talking about, and then I'm correct. So if he was peeing, that gave us hope that some of his lesser important organs were doing okay, which gave us more hope for his brain, because the brain will send oxygen, the body will send oxygen to the brain to preserve the brain for as long as it can. Okay, so the next day, I come back to the NICU, and I was like, okay, did he pee? And the nurse said, oh my gosh, not only did he peed twice the amount, and he pooped! And we were so happy for poop! Because, you know, poop is even less important than pee, I guess. And so, so what this meant was Christ was listening to our prayers. Our prayers were being answered. James was getting better. We had a good chance that he wasn't going to die. So instead, what they started warning us about was, okay, James is probably going to live. We don't know for how long, but he's going to be very severely disabled. So, I mean, I don't know how many times you can have your heart broken, but it was broken a lot for us in this moment. So we, you know, every time we got our son back, it was like he was taken away. And so we were told, okay, he's going to have very severe cerebral palsy. He would be strapped to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, completely unable to control his body. The cerebral palsy would be so severe that his body would be folded in on himself. He would be blind. He would be unable to eat. Mentally, he would not really be there at all. I was basically looking at having a baby and then a boy and possibly a man who in no way could communicate love to me or hold my hand or give me a hug. And gosh, that was really tough. And I remember the day that his feeding therapist was in the NICU room. And so I knew he was probably going to be blind. I knew he was going to be in a wheelchair. I knew that developmentally, mentally, he wouldn't age that much, you know, if you will. But the day that the feeding therapist told me that he would probably never eat, she took my last bit of normal. You know, I was like, well, at least I can give him birthday cake when he turns 1, right? And she said, no, I don't think that'll happen. And that, again, I mean, it broke my heart. It was really, really tough. Okay, so go to the next one. So we continued to pray. We literally had people, you know, from Alaska to Peru, you know, the country. There's a Peru, Illinois, so I always have to explain that. They're like, yeah, that's an hour away. Not impressive, but the country. So, and you know, in the UK, in Germany, all over, we had people praying for our son. And there were classrooms of Catholic school kids who every day would pray for a miracle through the intercession of Fulton Sheen for my baby boy. There were holy hours that were held like in New York City by people who didn't even know me, but they heard about it, and so they held a holy hour for our son. And James kept getting better. So when he was 6 days old, I finally got to hold him again, which was really, really wonderful. He was off the cooling therapy. And he looked at me with his eyes, and he followed me with his eyes. And I knew he wasn't going to be blind. I'm going to go. And so at 7 weeks, he finally was able to come home from the NICU. And at that point, I'll never forget one of the nurses, Sarah. She sat with me in James's NICU room, and she had tears in her eyes when she said, "He's just